Hi, my name is Hector, and this speech is for CTA 103. All right, let's say we have 20 people on my list to accompany me to a yacht party or dinner, right? That makes 21 of us. However, the package requires an extra person of a different age to register. So that if I were to ask one of you guys to register, would you? Let's say you do register. The package was already bought, and you're provided the events, the details of the events, and you show up. But when you show up, all 21 of us are already on the yacht. The music is loud, it's blasting, and then I see you, and I'm like, oh, hey, thank you for helping out, but your services are no longer needed. But feel free to dance to the music. You should be able to hear it, right? Technically, the music is playing, and technically, you should be able to dance to it, right? Technically. How many of us would argue that it's not the same thing as being on the yacht? How many of us would go even further and argue that it's not the same thing as being part of the group? This example highlights the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion practices, and how easy it is for companies to fall into those subtleties, such as tokenism, through those same practices. I'm a mentor and leadership coach who has worked with large groups of people with diverse backgrounds, and with all my best efforts, contributed to creating positive, inclusive cultures. It's important to what I have to say because diversity, equity, inclusion are all important components when building relationships, especially with our coworkers in the workplace. Today I'm here to talk about why DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, positively impacts the workplace via innovation, retention rate, profitability, and brand image. Additionally, I will emphasize even further that the goals, the intentions, the purpose of DEI ought to be in the vision statement of every organization. With that said, let's jump right in. I saw the results from our survey, and it brings me a lot of excitement. Why? Because 92% of us are familiar with what DEI is. I'm excited for two reasons. One, I don't have to spend too much time explaining what DEI is, and two, we already have that amazing and empowering information, that mindset present in our heads. What did surprise me though, was that about 50% of us are unsure how DEI affects our workplace. Well, for starters, diversity, equity, and inclusion practices create fair, welcoming, and respectful environments. Therefore, DEI practices affect our workplace and ought to remain in organizations because they boost innovation and they reduce turnover. Innovation. Firstly, innovation is not just applicable to technology. Innovation includes ideas and or methods for creating positive change. Whether it's creating something completely new or improving something that already exists. With so many diverse perspectives, ideas all come together and contribute to innovation. We do this all the time. When we advocate for the needs of our clients, we create positive change from so many perspectives. And what does that create? Optimum, high quality care for our clients. This is why DEI is important to keep in mind for that reason. Innovation, diversity, equity, and inclusion is amazing, empowering, and encompassing. Secondly, turnover rates. DEI frameworks should remain in organizations to improve turnover rates. With DEI initiatives aimed at fostering a community, workers feel a sense of belonging, thus reducing turnover. In fact, according to BetterUp, employees are 18 times more likely to stay with their employers who feel a sense of belonging. Let's dig even further to see where we stand. According to TriNet, a healthy turnover is somewhere between 15 and 20%, right? Let's get more specific. According to Behavioral Health Center of Excellence, the average turnover for large organizations, such as ours, is somewhere between 49% and a whopping 104%. 104%, that's huge. Want to know where we stand? Reach under your seats. We have an amazing turnover rate of 16%. That's a healthy turnover rate. I think that's evidence of how diverse, amazing, and empowering we are as a unit. That's amazing. This is wonderful because instead of spending time to train new hires, we can spend more time and resources to reinvest in things like our career development and peer partnerships, which in turn lead back to innovation. Diversity is amazing, empowering, and encompassing. To recap, DEI ought to remain in organizations because they have proven to increase innovation and reduce turnover rates, which leads to the next outcomes. DEI ought to remain in organizations because organizations that prioritize DEI have higher profitability and enhanced company image. Let's start with profitability. Of course, we want higher profitability. Higher innovation and higher retention rates lead to reduced spending on new trainings and more time spent on optimal client care, which leads to higher customer satisfaction, which ultimately leads to higher profit. In fact, according to a McKinsey and Company study, the most diverse companies are 33% more likely to outperform their competitors in profitability. When companies have higher profits, there are several key actions we can do to reinvest in ourselves, such as more staff amenities, more equipment, more bonuses like the last one. Even the remodeling that is taking place right now, that's a key action that companies do when there's higher profits. So, do we want diversity in the workplace? Yes, of course we do. We want diversity because it's amazing and empowering. On top of that, diversity is encompassing. Let's move on to another reason. DEI ought to remain in organizations because it enhances company image. In fact, according to Business Leadership Today, DEI is tied to a strong commitment to social responsibility, and customers and investors are attracted to companies that prioritize DEI practices. However, this is where DEI is misconstrued because representation is based on perceived value versus actual value. A quick example I can think of is maybe you're trying to buy a TV you have your mindset on, right? You go to Best Buy, there's the LG TV that you really want, but then your family member, friends, or even expert says, oh no, you should get the Sunny model. Your perceived value that you felt so strongly to purchase the original TV was instantly switched based on that recommendation. That's perceived value. This is why many would argue that DEI is detrimental to organizations because they focus on perception, on representation, rather than actual inclusion. We all remember Elon Musk's provocative statement, extracted from Forbes article, DEI must die. DEI aimed at ending discrimination may introduce new forms of unfairness. In the opening example, there was that unfairness. There was an act of tokenism. The act of being seen as doing the right thing instead of actually believing it's the right thing. Your registration to help out the larger group was used, and then your entry to the yacht was denied. That's what tokenism is. It's the act of doing something fair instead of actually believing that it is the right thing to do. And this happens a lot in companies, creating those opposed to DEI initiatives. This is why, my friends, I propose that DEI not only remain in organizations, but the values of DEI ought to become part of the vision statements of every organization. According to Brecht's website, organizations with vision statements outperform those companies that do not have vision statements. So with so many benefits that DEI provides to the workplace, such as increased innovation, increased profits, less turnover rate, better image, and with vision statements steering the direction, providing people a purpose, then it only makes sense to push the elements, the values, into the purpose of companies within their vision statements. DEI was not meant to remain as frameworks. DEI was meant to evolve from concept to reality to purpose. Here's how much purposeful some vision statements would sound like with DEI values placed into them. Let's take Google, for example. Here's their original vision statement: to provide access to the world's information in one click. Now let's modify that vision statement with DEI values within it: to provide access to the world's diverse information in one click. Let's take another example similar to it. Instagram: capture and share the world's moments. The modified vision statement with DEI within it sounds like capture and share the world's diverse moments. DEI is amazing. DEI is empowering. DEI is encompassing. So while DEI increases profits and company image, tokenism may occur, which is why DEI ought to not only remain in organizations, but also evolve into the vision statements of every organization. So, to recap, DEI must remain in organizations to increase innovation and reduce turnover, which then lead to higher profits and enhanced image. Furthermore, DEI ought to be pushed and evolve into values, purpose within the vision statements of every organization, because the spirit of DEI is purposeful in bringing all of us together. It is amazing, it is empowering, it is encompassing. Lastly, in our efforts to foster a community that honors diversity, equity, and inclusion, as it improves our work environment, by bringing us together, let's remember, both unity starts with you, and division ends with I. DEI.